What if I told you that the gold standard of reading intervention isn't actually that shiny? A few years ago, a meta-analysis questioned whether the hands-on, multi-sensory part of Orton Gillingham even matters. If you're a worried parent, that headline should make your stomach drop. I'm Tracy Young, an Orton Gillingham trained, ALTA-certified practitioner and founder of the Literacy Keys. I love to ask questions. In the next 20 minutes, I'm handing you the real, unsugar-coated story behind the Orton Gillingham reading intervention. You are about to discover what science says and why some critics might be missing the bigger picture. So stick with me. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Young, OG tutor extraordinaire, founder of theliteracykeys.com, and most importantly, mom of a dyslexic daughter. Welcome to my podcast, where you'll discover ways to unlock your child's reading potential. I'll share tips, strategies, and war stories that have happened along the way, because everyone deserves to be able to read. So let's get started. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy Keys. I'm Tracy Young, an ALTA-certified Orton Gillingham tutor and mom of a dyslexic daughter. I'm really glad you're here. Today, we're talking about something near and dear to my heart. But if I'm honest with you, it's also a tad bit uncomfortable because what I'm going to be saying is not a bed of roses. So several years ago in 2021, a meta-analysis was conducted on Orton Gillingham reading interventions. Now, when I started this podcast, I promised the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm not going to sugarcoat the study. I'm going to translate it so you can make an informed decision. For the next 20 minutes or so, I'll walk you through what the research says, in plain English, yes, that is my promise, what it means for real kids that struggle to read, and why Orton Gillingham has an excellent foundation for helping kids become proficient readers. So grab a cup of coffee, whatever you're drinking, and let's get started. Now, before we dive into the study, and I said I'm going to keep it in simple English, right? No PhD required. I want to clear up and just introduce a couple of things. So the first is that Orton Gillingham isn't a program. It is not a curriculum. It's an approach. It's an explicit, systematic, structured literacy approach that teaches the why and how of the English language. For all of those listeners who said that English just doesn't have rules, bah, it definitely does. Phonics, spelling rules, morphology, and using multisensory techniques are all part of that Orton Gillingham approach. A child sees it, they hear it, they say it, and sometimes they even move with it. And it's that part, in my mind, that makes Orton Gillingham feel different from just a worksheet at school. I understand many people think of Orton Gillingham as a program, but it's important to remember that it's not, particularly when we're talking about this study. The instructors, the people that teach Orton Gillingham and programs based on the Orton Gillingham approach have very different levels of training and expertise. All right, so that's the first point. Now, let me also explain what a meta-analysis is. It is a statistical method of analyzing several studies all at once. Believe it or not, there's a statistical benefit to analyzing hundreds or thousands of results across different studies. It allows you to reduce the noise that can be found in an individual study because you are going over larger quantities, right? And you're looking for similarities across the different studies. So by combining these similar studies, researchers can detect subtle nuances that they might not when dealing with just an individual study. Okay, I get it. I am definitely geeking out on you. A key point to remember about a meta analysis is the following: if any of the original studies had design flaws, then the meta analysis will also be flawed. So let's dive in. So, this meta analysis happened a couple of years ago, and I have heard of it. There was, I remember, a lot of talk where people were saying, well, oh, gee, it's just not that effective. And I was like, well, where is that coming from? Well, recently, this past weekend, in fact, I found out because I was part of a group that meets monthly or several times a year of Orton Gillingham therapists and instructors. And part of what that particular session was all about was discussing the 2021 meta analysis from Stevens and colleagues journal. So the Reading League Journal did a great job at explaining the study in fairly simple English. And I linked the article in the show notes for any of you other geeks who does want to kind of dive in and read the actual information. So the meta analysis looked at 16, so multiple, rigorous studies of small group Orton Gillingham instruction. Now, these were branded programs like Wilson, Barton, Spire, and all of those programs are built on Orton Gillingham principles. Every child in those studies had word level reading difficulties. So, what did they find? The good news: the core of Orton Gillingham, the explicit, systematic teaching of phonological awareness, letter sound connection, and decoding, has mountains of strong evidence behind it. Decades of it, in fact, to validate that it works. All right? Great news. But that part was not up for debate. The bad news: the meta analysis questioned whether the multisensory piece, the touching, the moving, whether it really adds something extra on top of good systematic instruction. If you listen to that sentence, right, it's kind of like, well, so do I do it? Do I not do it? You're questioning, and in fact, your stomach even drops like, what have I been doing all along? Right? Mine did, as I'm an OG practitioner. I'm trained in this, right? So is it effective? Because I want to make sure that the student or the child next to me that I am instructing is learning to read, write, and spell. Now, one of the things, right, is that the research could not definitively say with confidence that the results didn't just happen by chance, which is a very convoluted way of saying, nah, they're not sure, and they need to conduct more research. When I first read the meta analysis, I was actually surprised that the studies did not control for the level of Orton Gillingham expertise or implementation. And for me, that was a big red flag when I read it. I remember jotting down in the notes, question mark, level of experience. Because let's face it, I am a much better educational therapist today after hundreds upon hundreds of hours helping students than when I first started. And I also know, in talking to parents, that schools don't always send their teachers for intensive training in Wilson, right? So, how could that information not be included, number one, in a study or in a meta analysis that's looking at the effectiveness? What we find at times is schools will enroll a teacher in the introductory workshop, let's say, for Wilson. That represents 16 hours of training in which they learn about language structure because they didn't get it in their educational university or training, right? And how to execute a Wilson lesson plan, 16 hours. That's it. So they have a study, or they have multiple studies, where they're analyzing the effectiveness of Wilson and then extrapolating or projecting out to say, okay, Wilson is based on OG. So therefore, it is representative of all these different things without ever asking how many hours of intensive preparation does the individual who is working with the child have? If you are learning to drive, do you want to be taught by someone who has 5 hours behind the wheel? Or do you want to be taught by someone who has 5,000 hours behind the wheel? Ask yourself that question. Why? It makes a difference. Okay, so why am I telling you all of this? Because honestly, I want you to have the real story, not the marketing version, the real one. You spend good money trying to find the best therapist for your child and trusting a school to know what they are doing. And now, someone, whether it's because you're listening to this podcast or you're actually reading the article, again, several years old, someone is saying that the gold standard isn't the gold standard, right? Beyond frustrating, I get it. Okay, let's take a deep breath, relax, say om. The goal overall is continuous improvement. Science evolves. Right? If we think about all the information that we have discovered because of functional MRIs, we now know how the brain learns to read. Right? Science is evolving. It improves. So it is really important to have some part or to conduct self-analysis and soul searching. It's only with that that we can get better, right? And improvement can't happen if we're unwilling to be critical. A meta study or analysis like this one is powerful because it averages across lots of research at once. But it does have its limitations. We can't simply, and the researchers clearly stated in the analysis, right? Many of the studies used in the analysis had small numbers of children, and the research designed varied. Some of the programs, some of the studies included extra pieces that weren't pure Orton Gillingham, which could muddy the water. And as I said previously, the expertise of the individuals conducting the intervention was never mentioned or factored in, right? Do a regression analysis in order to figure out what the relevancy is. Okay, so where do we go from here, right? Let's take a minute and leave reading research. And now let's hop over to psychology and look at how human memory actually works, right? Because we have seen in psychology and neuroscience over and over that engaging more than one sense builds stronger, longer lasting memories. This isn't a feel good idea, it is well documented and studied. But what's the problem? It's in the psychology department. It's in the neuroscience department. It's not in the reading research department. It's like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is saying. But enough of that. Well, according to dual coding theory, when you pair something, let's say a child hears or says, with something that they see and touch, the brain actually creates two separate memory pathways that are linked together. Think of it like two roads heading off to the same destination. The good news is if one road is a little foggy, the other one still gets you there. And that's why recall becomes faster and more reliable the more senses that are involved. All right, let's not just talk about one thing. In 2023, Researchers at Oxford studied learning at the level of brain circuits. I think it was fruit flies or something like that. I did link the research in the show notes, just in case anyone is interested. Well, they found that when learning involves more than one sense or sensory pathways become bound together. So why is this important? Right? Because later a single cue from just one sense can retrieve and pull up the entire memory. One Harvard neurologist put it plainly: when you're forming memories, you want them to be as multisensory as you can make them. The more senses provide more entry points, which generate more ways to retrieve the memory. Similarly, other studies have found significantly better long term retention when learners use multisensory cues instead of just a single sense. Now, let's think about it from the perspective of a child who's struggling to read. Extrasensory scaffolding might be the difference between a spelling rule that slips away in 2 days or a spelling rule that actually sticks. Granted, I am not a scientist, right? But I've seen it time and time again. Students remember things when we incorporate multiple senses. I was doing something just yesterday, and with the student, we were using an analogy of now pretend you have M&Ms. We're putting M&Ms into your hand, and I made her cup her hands as if she was holding the M&Ms, right? Why? Because she's going to remember that discussion, right, by cupping her hands. That's part of the retrieval process. So, the reading specific study on Orton Gillingham, that meta analysis that we talked about, concluded the need for more research. So, at least that was great. They didn't say definitively yes or no. And they did what scientists always do: we can't say it definitively, we need more research, which is really a good thing, right? That is an absolutely solid recommendation. But we know from science in other departments how humans actually hold on to and retrieve information. Mm? So it's part of the reason that the multisensory part of Orton Gillingham, what we see anecdotally, it works in practice. The simple answer is, well, it's how the brain works. Now, that is not to take away or dismiss the need for additional research. It is absolutely needed. But what I would like to see is I would like to see controlling or somehow analyzing and dividing the results according to the level of expertise of the individual administering the reading intervention. All right? The more years you have doing this, chances are the better at it. It's that Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours. Right? See how I like to, just combine all these different things? All right. So, what does this mean for you? You're busy, right? Maybe you're driving to work and it's like, Tracy, get to the point. Yeah. I get it. I get it. All right. So, this podcast is all about practical steps, right? So, let's make it practical. First, as a parent, you need to prioritize explicit, systematic phonics instruction. That is non negotiable. There are decades of strong research behind it, so that is not being questioned. That was in the meta analysis. Second, don't necessarily throw out the multisensory piece just yet, simply because a study couldn't isolate the variable, right? For a lot of kids, especially the ones that wrestle with attention, working memory, or phonological processing, the hands on part encourages engagement, focus, and retention. Third, you got to be an informed consumer. Not every branded program or Orton Gillingham tutor is the same. And not every child needs that intensity. You want to look for a structured, cumulative, diagnostic teaching that meets your child exactly where they're at. So here's what I'll leave you with today. Science is always evolving. We don't have perfect evidence on every element of Orton Gillingham, and that's okay. But we have more than enough to know that explicit, systematic, structured literacy helps kids read, spell, and write. Most importantly, it helps kids believe that they can. So if this episode helped you feel just a little more informed, please share it with another parent who needs to hear it. I thank you for listening, and I will see you next week. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to the Literacy Keys podcast. Follow us on social media, and most importantly, tell a friend. See you next week.